Some cards break the rules, some cards break the game, and some cards break the very spirit of the players who have to play against them. We have 4 different kinds of cards spread across 5 different games that we're going to look at here. Hated cards in all TCG history. The further through the video we get, the worse the cards are. Act 1. The cards that end games before they even start. This was a very simple one, because this little Meloetta back in 2022 would do the unthinkable and deal 240 damage turn 1 to KO your opponent's only Pokemon and win the game instantly.
It was one of the scariest cards in the format.
Thanks to its murderous Echo attack, which dealt 70 damage for each Fusion Strike energy you had in play. So on your first turn of the game, going second, you could turn attach 1 to Meloetta, then use a Lesser Sparkle to attach 2 more from your deck, meaning with 1 damage modifier like Power Tablet or Choice Belt, you are now hitting the magic 240 damage, which was enough to KO every basic Pokemon in format at the time pretty much, and stop your opponent from getting into their VMAX or V-Star Pokemon,
preventing the opponent to actually playing the game.
And since you had the Fusion Strike engine to draw a ton of cards, with Genesec's ability, this combination was super easy to pull off, especially with cards like Rotom Phone and Cramomatic.
1 Cramomatic heads and all of a sudden you're off to the races.
This made the Fusion Strike box a deadly force going first or second, since if you went first, you could set up your beefy Mew VMAX with a ton of buffs, and if you were going second, you could use Meloetta to quickly catapult yourself into the lead, meaning Meloetta got a ton of hate from the community because it felt very unfair, super one-sided, because if you opened 1 Pokemon and you had to pass, there was nothing you could do about Meloetta stealing that game from you. All of this meant that the Fusion Box Mew VMAX deck never really left Tier 1, winning events here, there and everywhere, including the 2023 World Championships. In Yu-Gi-Oh! There was another unsuspecting card, but this one was so strong that it actually resulted in the ban list getting created. Now, Invasion of Chaos was actually a pretty mad set that completely changed the metagame overnight. It introduced the Chaos cards into the game that could easily be summoned by removing a Dark and Light monster from your graveyard, meaning you still had your normal summon for the turn too. And there were 2 obvious standouts, Blackluster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning, and Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End. Blackluster Soldier with its effect would just straight up banish a monster on your opponent's side of the board, no ifs, ands or buts, and it could also attack twice as well, meaning it could wreak havoc on your opponent's side of the board with its hefty 3000 attack stat. Emperor Dragon is the main one we want to focus on here though, since its effect would let you send all cards from both players' hands and field to the graveyard, and you would deal 300 life point damage for each one sent away in this way. So this seems super strong, right? So this seems strong, sure, but it removes your own cards, so just how good can it really be? Well, you see, if you had a Sangan or a Witch of the Black Forest in play when you resolve the effect, you could now grab a Yatta Garasu from your hand and immediately attack with that. Well, what does that do? Well, this is the card we are mostly focused on here right now, because Yatta will stop your opponent from drawing a card next turn. So you see what's just happened? You've completely wiped their hand and field, and now you want to stop them from drawing turn after turn after turn. So if you just kept on attacking with Yatta, you would slowly but surely guaranteed to win the game, since your opponent literally can't do nothing about it. They've got nothing in play and they can't draw a card. This took over the metagame, forcing action from Konami, resulting in both Soldier and Emperor Dragon to get limited. This didn't matter though, because games just became a race to who could find them and get them in play first. And since the Chaos cards also rewarded cards being in your graveyard, which a lot of other cards were previously balanced by, like Graceful Charity and Painful Choice, this Chaos cards really shook the format up, and this led to the first ever Forbidden list from being made, which nuked a ton of the deck, like Sangan, Witch of the Black Forest, and Emperor Dragon, leaving one of the most insane legacies we have ever seen. This next card had people questioning Wizards of the Coast's playtesting. Oko, Thief of Crown. 3 mana, that's all it took, and Oko would immediately take over. His +2 created a field token, fine, okay, but then the +1, turn any creature into a 3/3 elk. Yours, mine, didn't matter. Did you have a legendary dragon in play? It's now a deer. Any one of your opponent's threats? It's now an elk. Your opponent's big artifact? It's now an elk. And because it was a +1, he got more loyalty every time he erased someone's board presence. It was a removal spell on steroids. It was recurring, it was one-sided, and it was untouchable pretty much after 2 activations. Oko didn't need any protection because he was the threat. He rendered creatures irrelevant. He turned powerful artifacts into nothing burgers and outpaced every threat with laughable ease. Within weeks of its release, it was banned in Standard, then Pioneer, and then Modern, and then Legacy. Meaning it wasn't just a ban, it was a mass exodus from the game. For many players, Oko represents everything with Planeswalkers design. Too much loyalty, too much value, too little downside. But he wasn't just a thief of crowns, he was the thief of format. Now most cards in the One Piece TCG that are in the top ends tend to have really cool effects, but nothing that's super overpowered across the board. But Gecko Moria allowed the player to generate 2 bodies in the same turn, as it let you play a 4-cost and a 2-cost. This quickly became a staple in black decks, because you could slot in any removal package and just get rid of your opponent's board with little to no effort. Moria took over the format it existed in until it was eventually banned from the game. One card that didn't get banned from the game but arguably realistically should have was Marshadow.
Basically, just putting your opponent's hand down to 4 cards and saying, hey, play the game from here, was a pretty good strategy.
Marshadow was so strong it literally had a phrase made after itself, that I got let loose out the game. And the reason is pretty damn simple. Marshallow's ability would force both players to shuffle in their hand into their deck and then you would draw 4 cards. Why was this so hated then? Well, you see, the player base eventually cottoned on that if it was your first turn, you could essentially use this to force your opponent to start the game with a 4-card hand instead of 6. This quite often meant that you were bricked before you had a chance to do anything about it. Just think about that for a second. You sat down for a game of Pokemon, look at your starting hand, it's gone, and now you have 4 unplayable cards. That's really fun. Taking all your playable options from your hand and leaving you to cross your fingers that you drew anything good. Because if you didn't, you was in big trouble. And this effect is so strong that it's normally tied to once per turn supporters like Judge, Iono or Marnie. So having access to it in a coming into play ability on a basic Pokemon no less was wild. Act 2, lock it down and throw away the key. I couldn't believe this card when I first saw it, and my suspicions were correct. It was deadly.
Mystic Mine stole me so many games.
Mystic Mine would grind games down to an absolute halt, since Mystic Mine would stop your opponent from doing anything if they had more monsters in play than you.
And by playing Mystic Mine, you were able to steal some games just because of the card entering the field.
So if you had no monsters in play, your opponent was normally just completely stuck. And since there was a ton of ways to fetch it, it was a trap that could be sprung literally out of nowhere. Out of the gates, this was a very grindy deck that would stop your opponent and then use a lot of spells and traps to inflict minor amounts of life point damage, and over time you would just win. But then over time you started to see Mystic Mine paired with other archetypes.
The main issue with this was when combo decks started siding Mystic Mine, and usually against a combo deck you don't side in your spell or trap removal. And so the opponent then was siding Mystic Mine, knowing that you're not going to side spell and trap removal against them, and that's the trick. You don't have an out of Mystic Mine, you lose the game.
And then later on we saw cards like Final Countdown of all things start to give the deck a whole new plan of attack. But after a couple format changes, Mystic Mine actually became a format staple, since its ability to get sprung out of nowhere, combined with a time with removal for it was actually kinda weak, you could immediately steal games that you had no right winning. Quite honestly, letting you come back in the game even if your opponent had started to run away with it. Very strong card that instantly would change the game the second it hit the field. So of course it ended up getting banned. This next card though is the type of card that really makes your opponent stop, read it a couple times and think, oh right, yeah, it really does say that. Opposition Agent for 3 mana doesn't just stop your opponent from tutoring or searching cards from their deck, it actually kind of steals it. Because if your opponent tries to search their deck while opposition agent is on board, you get to search their deck for them. Then you pick the card and then you exile it. They get absolutely nothing. And you can play the card too if you like. This turns one of Magic's most common characteristics, tutoring, searching, into an absolute liability. Cards like Demonic Tutor are instant disasters. But what makes Opposition Agent really hated is that it's not just a mean card, it's a flash mean card. Meaning you can just sit in your hand like a trap, waiting for your opponent, and the second they dare to search the deck, you can sling Opposition Agent down. Now their combo piece can be your combo piece. This would turn games into paranoia simulators. Players either stop searching altogether, which isn't a good idea, or they play right into it. And it doesn't really feel clever, it doesn't really feel interactive, it just feels like a bit like a gotcha moment that punishes people for, well, to be honest, just playing their decks. Which is exactly what Diablo in Lorcana does as well. Diablo is a nasty piece of work that I can't believe ever got printed, often paired with pre-errata bookie, more on that later, to make life really hard for your opponent. Since whenever Diablo was exerted, whenever your opponent would draw a card, you got to draw a card as well, and this included their top deck for the turn. This would give you immense value if your opponent couldn't immediately remove it, and since it had evasive, it wouldn't be easy to remove since other characters can't challenge it. Now to be fair, it is vulnerable to cards like Let the Storm Rage On and Fire the Cannons since it only had 2 willpower, but you could avoid all of that completely by putting Diablo in a hidden cove location, which is very easy to get into play. And heaven forbid you get 2 or 3 Diablos out, because quite honestly it gets a bit silly. All of this has led Diablo to feel like a very unfair card, since I get to draw all the time, and since it's often paired with discarding strategies, it really starts to become a bit of a snowball win more situation. Because while your opponent is struggling to do anything, you get to just draw a silly amount of cards and quite honestly laugh at them. Now, despite the community being in an absolute outrage about Diablo, Ravensburger haven't done anything to Diablo yet, but who knows if it will stay that way forever. So what do you think is worse out of interest? Diablo drawing cards whenever your opponent draws cards, or Opposition Agent ruining all those search opportunities in Magic? Let me know in the comments. But all the way back in 1999, trainer cards in Pokemon had no limits. No once per turn clause like supporters, no once per deck restrictions like ace-specs, just raw unchecked power. And amongst all this chaos, there was still one trainer card that stood out heads and tails better than the rest, the most brutal of them all. At first glance, it might seem like a boring trainer card that everyone skips through in pack opening, sure, but super energy removal is deadly, letting you discard one of the energy attached to your Pokemon to strip 2 energy from your opponent, instantly, with no coin flip balancing factors, no conditions, just boring, no counterplay gaming. This single effect warped the entire Pokemon metagame around it. It disrupted, destroyed strategies, and quite honestly made a huge chunk of the card pool unplayable. Because let's be honest, decks had to attack for 1 or 2 energy in this time period, because any 3 or 4 energy attackers for the most part were useless, all because of super energy removal. Like, let's take a look at all of these meta relevant attackers at the time. What do you notice? So if you needed more than 2 energy to function, just forget it. You either had to attack cheaply and fast, or you could reattach as well. Otherwise you would get left behind. Entire deck lists warped around this card. To be fair, actually scratch that, the entire metagame warped around this card. Strategies would die before they even got started. And the worst part is, because it was so splashable, it was everywhere. Deck destroying, dream killing, metagame menace. And that's why decades later, it is still remembered with a mix of fear, fury, and frustration. Act 3, win more, win faster, win alone. 2 words. There are 2 words in the Yu-Gi-Oh community that's caused colossal global headache. Max C.
Max C was one of the most hated cards in the competitive Yu-Gi-Oh history.
Modern Yu-Gi-Oh lives on special summons like Link, Synchro, and XYZ, and Max C preys on them all. Since Max C lets you draw a card every time your opponent's special summons, you can turn all of your opponent's summons into free draws, and quite honestly, turn those summons into free game wins. The result? a metagame that orbits one single card, the likes of which I have never ever seen. You see, as of mid-May 2025, Maxi shows up in 93% of Master Duel lists, a usage rate that quite honestly I don't think many other cards in other TCGs could ever match. And because it's everywhere and so strong, you have to respect it, meaning its counters now feel like must plays, otherwise Maxi just walks all over you. So cards like Ash Blossom and Crossout Designator now see a lot more play than they otherwise normally would have. The counter to the counter to the counter. Endless layers of mandatory cards that just kill creativity and deck building, all because of Maxi. And worse still, if you get hit by a Maxi, you now face a brutal fork in decision making.
You can either follow one of the two paths under Maxi. You can stop in front of Maxi and don't go off with your combo, which means that your opponent doesn't draw a lot of cards, but you don't develop a cool board and you don't have a good board for the rest of the game. Or you can ignore Maxi and then go off with your combo anyway, and then you will leave your opponent with so many cards in their hand. And in Yu-Gi-Oh!, the more cards you have, the better your game state is.
That way. The third option is probably the most fun. Take the Maxi Challenge, where you try and summon as much as possible so you can force your opponent to draw their whole deck before their start of their next turn. Because if they can't draw a card at the start of their turn, you actually win. Now this is hilarious when it works, but let's be honest, it's pretty much impossible to pull off when it really matters. OCG players still live with this dilemma, by the way, but the TCG has had enough. Since when it was allowed at a full 3 count, it was stupidly strong, so everyone would tech for it. But it wasn't really much better at 2 or 1, because now players wouldn't tech for it, because it's not as common. But the second your opponent did find it in this scenario, you felt like you were cheesed out the game. Because, well, there was nothing you could do about it, quite simply. So eventually, it got banned. Love it or loathe it, Maxi is the textbook definition of a most hated card. Format warping, decision paralyzing, forever fueling fiery forum debates. Another card that fueled fiery debates was Sakazuki Leader. This leader got to draw cards for effectively no cost, and with all the support around it, it became an instant strong tier 0 deck. With black and blue cards centering around removal, a leader that could then cycle through the pieces to set up these perfect combos became way too oppressive, leading to a ban. Now this next card didn't get banned, but it kinda did. You'll see what I mean when we get there. Because unlike the other hand-ripped cards that we have looked at so far, Lorcana's biggest offender doesn't look like he will cause as much carnage. But by far, this is easily the most controversial Lorcana card we have ever seen. What did he do to kick up the fanbase into such a tizzy then? Because they rioted and Ravensburger had to step in. You see, Bucky was a 2-cost 1/1 stat card with the ward keyword, which is super relevant, you'll see why later. Its ability read, whenever you played a Floodborn from your hand, your opponent would have to discard 1 card from their hand. Now, Floodborn cards are like evolutions in Pokemon or XYZ a little bit in Yu-Gi-Oh! In the sense that you can place them on top of a lower cost card with the same name, so you can get them into play faster for less cost. For example, I could use 5 ink to get this Robin Hood into play, but when I did play it, its ink would be drying, so it couldn't do anything for the turn it was played. And this isn't the most efficient. However, if you had the 1-cost Robin Hood in play, you could now get this Floodborn 5-cost Robin Hood in play for just 3 ink. 2 turns earlier, and since it was in play already, it could now challenge, sing or quest anything on that turn as well. And this is where Bucky would come in, because as long as you had a Robin Hood or a 1-cost Diablo in play turn 1, you could play Bucky turn 2, and then on turn 3 you could very easily shift into Diablo, Robin Hood on turn 3, forcing your opponent to discard. And now you have this hefty 5-cost on turn 3 that could now sing Sudden Chill, so your opponent had to discard another card from their hand, which is gross by the way. Or you now have access to 5-cost songs on turn 3, like Along Comes Zeus, decimating your opponent's board, all while they are having cards ripped from their hand as well. And make no mistake about it, after that you could just play another Floodborn on turn 4 and turn 5 and force your opponent to discard over and over and over again. And to rub salt in the wound, if you managed to get a Prince John into play, you would draw a card every time your opponent would discard one, leading to massive runaway games. And you would just keep playing strong Floodborn cards turn after turn after turn until your opponent eventually ran out of options. And what made Bucky so strong is that because it had ward, it couldn't be targeted by effects that would otherwise remove it. So cards like Fire the Cannons, Let the Storm Rage On, or even Pinocchio so you could exert it, all wouldn't work on Bucky. So it would sit there, permanently safe, while your other high powered cards would do the work, meaning you had very little counterplay to it, frustrating the player base to no end. I've never seen the Lorcana community be so outspoken about their hatred of a card, and their cries were eventually heard by Ravensburger, who ended up effectively banning the card by errataing it into oblivion. First up, they increased the cost from 2 to 3, making it a lot worse on the curve. They also removed its ward keyword, so now it can be targeted by effects to remove it. And they changed its ability, so it would only pop if you use shift to get a Floodborn into play, making it a lot harder to realistically use turn after turn after turn. And ever since that errata, we haven't seen Bucky have any meta relevance since. But as bad as Bucky was, I've never really seen people quit the game because of it. This next card though, players quit in droves.
You go, hey, let me use my GX attack. That's clearly very, very strong and breaks the fundamental rules of Pokemon.
Arceus Dialga and Palkia GX was strong. Format warping, prize skewing and soul crushing. Its once per game GX attack alter creation would give all your Pokemon a plus 30 damage boost for the rest of the game, which quite honestly is very strong on its own, but it also made it that every KO you took you would take an extra prize card, meaning that the game wouldn't take 6 attacks to win now, it would take 3.
And I remember me reading ADP and thinking, okay, this has to have a really high power level in cards, like this Pokemon looks really strong and the GX attack is insane. Then I checked other cards in the game and I realized how broken ADP was.
Knock out 2 Pokemon V or GX and you were done. The game was over. And the deck was built to exactly do that. Cards like Crobat V, Dedenne GX and Tapu Lele GX all became liabilities. Easy 3 prize targets that would get sniped by ADP's ultimate ray attack, which was now hitting for a boosted 180 damage. Its early partner was Keldeo GX, a safeguard Pokemon that would kinda hit hard, sure, but a bit awkward to use. The real nightmare was when Zacian V came out. A basic Pokemon that hit like a truck that you could charge up by using Metal Saucer. Now you would outpace everything in the game, because with the Alter Creation boost and cards like Galarian Zigzagoon or Vitality Band, you was one-shotting everything in the game. More Wild GX would drag out your opponent's support Pokemon from their hand into play. So if your opponent was trying to get cheeky and not put the Dedenne down, you would force it down for no effect. Gross. And once Aegis/V came out, the deck was simply uncounterable because its attack would shred through any protection, like Decidueye's Forest Camo ability that would otherwise make it immune to damage from Zacian and ADP. All of this led to one of the most hated phrases in Pokemon history, boss, game, where the ADP player literally didn't care what you had in the active spot, it would just use boss's orders to go around it twice to pick up 2 easy KOs and win the game. ADP didn't care about the board, it didn't care about your strategy, quite honestly, it blew past your setup and left you with nothing, so you would win nothing. It was a villainous deck, an efficient deck, a relentless deck, and all of that meant it was absolutely despised. Act 4, the reset everything cards. These are ridiculous, and that's exactly what Fiber Jar did. A flip effect monster that forced both players to shuffle all cards from their hand, field and graveyard back into their deck, and then both players would draw 5 cards. So this would essentially be a game reset button, and those 5 cards would instantly decide the game, let's be honest here. And again, this could get played in everything. So it did get played in everything, leading to mind games being played, because if your opponent had a single face down card in defense mode, you had to wonder if it was a Fiber Jar, because if you dared attack into it, the whole game would change. And the worst part is, it wasn't actually easily counterable at the time. Only cards like Nobleman of Crossout, Exiled Force and Suzuki Samurai were the best ways to counter it, but not every deck had access to them, meaning Fiber Jar caught a quick ban and probably won't get unbanned anytime soon because of its ability to just draw out games very, very long. Gum Gum Giant. This event allows players to draw 2 additional cards while also countering a 4k at life. While this seems like not much, there actually isn't a lot of ways to generate card draw in One Piece, so seeing those additional cards to save yourself at the end of the game is actually huge. This has single-handedly catapulted purple leaders to the top of the game and created a super oppressive tier 0 meta. But now, it's time. Act 5, the true villains, money, meta, and pure misery. Back in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh, beatdown decks were king. 7-colored fish and Lejin were obvious standouts for being level 4 monsters with the highest attack stat, meaning you could put these in play no matter what and they could run over most stuff, while applying big hefty life point damage. That was what the early Yu-Gi-Oh metagame was about. Now there were cards like Dark Elf that had 2000 attack, but you had to pay life points to use it. This meant the metagame was centralized around the strongest 4-star monsters, Lejin 7-colored fish. This made some cards strictly unoptimal, Neo the Magic Swordsman and Battlelock. That all changed though with the first tournament pack. You see, these were packs that were designed to incentivize players to get into the competitive aspect of the game. 3 cards packs that can't be bought by other means, you would only get them by going to local events, meaning these were much harder to get your hands on compared to normal packs. Now this normally wouldn't be a problem if these tournament packs don't have any exclusive meta relevant cards in them at high rarities, because that would make them extremely rare and hard to get your hands on. And unfortunately that is exactly what Mechanical Chaser was, since it was an ultra rare in Tournament Pack 1, meaning you would get one in every 109 packs. So why is this an issue? Because Mechanical Chaser was the unthinkable. A 4-star monster with 1850 attack, instantly making it the face of beatdown decks. But because it was so rare, its price started to jump as high as $200 at the time, or inflation adjusted $357 today. Meaning under similar circumstances, you would need to drop over $1,000 to get a playset of these. So now sit down and imagine, if the best card in whatever game you were playing, you would need to drop $1,000 to get into your deck. That's why the card was hated, because you were instantly at a huge disadvantage if you didn't have it. So the game quickly became a bit of a money pit. Simply, if you had more money to burn, you would have the best deck in the room no matter what. Mechanical Chaser would simply suck out all the fun from the game. And that's exactly what Hull Breacher would do in Magic as well. It is a hard stop on fun. A 3-mana flash speed card, so it's very easy to hit the board and very hard to stop when it does. It simply rewrites the rules of Magic. Whenever your opponent would attempt to draw extra cards, they just don't. You get a treasure token instead. So they lose value and you gain ramp. And the worst part is, they don't get a choice. This kind of asymmetry doesn't just punish decks, it simply obliterates them. You don't get to play the game anymore, but I do. And Hull Breacher doesn't even need to attack. It just sits there like Bucky, silently stealing every card you thought you was about to see. And because it's a flash creature, the setup is invisible. It didn't take long for this card to earn its reputation. In Commander, Hull Breacher went from underrated tech to a table destroying monster, and it quickly got banned for turning what would otherwise be interactive multiplayer games into solo experiences. Hull Breacher was simply a shut-off valve for entire strategy, and that's exactly what Seismitoad EX would do as well.
Seismitoad EX is an unassuming card. 30 damage for a double colorless energy, and item lock. Sure, the item lock's pretty annoying, but the craziest part is all the tools that came with it.
2 words capable of turning any game of Pokemon into a swamp of misery. Quaking Punch only needed a double colorless energy to attack, and it would do 30 damage. I mean, that sounds fine, alright? That's not a lot. But the real horror was in the sentence that followed afterwards. Your opponent can't play any item cards next turn. No Ultra Ball, no VS Seeker, no Rare Candy. Basically meant you had no escape. Bear in mind the format ran on these item cards, so having them shut down instantly is devastating. And if you, the Seismitoad player, would keep up the Quaking Punches turn after turn after turn, the lock would never lift, and that's exactly what Seismitoad players would do. And since it was a basic Pokemon, it was very easy to get Seismitoad into play. And once it would soak up a few feeble hits because your opponent was stuck doing a whole lot of nothing, you would use Super Scoop Up or AZ to bounce it, heal off all the damage and drop it right back down again. Instant reset, rinse and repeat until your opponent's morale hits 0. And Seismitoad never really fought alone. It had a bevy of partners. Crobat lines for extra damage, Giratina EX to stop special energy and punish Mega Decks, and Garbodor to ability lock at the same time, to literally drain any last drop of hope from your opponent. Or you could play Crawdon, if he was a Chad like me, to discard the last few resources your opponent dared to have. Stalling, suffocating, soul crushing. Seismitoad EX checks every one of those boxes on the most hated cards checklist, and when rotation finally banished it, the player base had a sigh of relief, unless you was playing expanded, where it still sees a little bit of play today. But let me know what you think about this video. Have I missed off any hated cards? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear them. Maybe we could do a part 2. But if you like this video and made it this far, hit the like button and consider subscribing. It honestly would mean the world to me. And why don't you watch this video here, where I go through the most powerful cards from each year of competitive Pokemon TCG action.